Welcome to Ramblings of Mayor Kirk Wilson, retired. This is a vlog of my first attempt at it. I hope you'll find it both interesting and enjoyable. We're going to start out today talking about things that occurred after I became mayor. I took the office in 1986 and I left in 2012. And in between, I've done a number of unique and interesting things. We will not talk about that today, though. We'll go back and look at it. And one of the biggest things that happened, and probably one of the things that very few people even notice as they go through their day, is that we are now a home rule municipality, which kind of really confuses everybody because in Pennsylvania, you either live in a city of a first class, a second class city, a second class A city, or you could live in a third class city. But the third class cities are even divided up more. And then you have townships of the first class, you have townships of the second class, and then you have boroughs. And finally, believe it or not, there's a town, a legal town in Pennsylvania. Local government in Pennsylvania is crazy, and that's probably the best way to put it. Now, I don't know how many of you know who the town is in Pennsylvania, but that's something for you to research. That's your homework for you to do. Now, as I said, Carlisle is a borough, but they became a home rule borough. So you got to say, what's that? Well, basically, here's what it changed. A number of things, but there were probably maybe two major things. Number one, in the old former borough government, the mayor was in charge of the police department. The mayor also reviewed every ordinance that the council passed, and he or she had the opportunity to sign it into law, or the mayor could veto it. And if the mayor vetoed it, the council then had an opportunity to override that veto. A second thing was the mayor had the opportunity to cast a tie-breaking vote. For instance, it said 7-member council. Well, okay, that meant that if there were only 6 members there, or there were 7 and 1 member had to abstain, and it was a 3-3 tie, obviously the mayor could cast that vote. How did it change? Well, instead of the mayor being in charge of the police department, that responsibility was turned over to the borough manager, and he or she was in charge of the police department just like before when they were in charge of the public works department and codes department and parks and recreation. The mayor suddenly became a 7th member of council. The mayor also acted as the president of council. So that's basically how things have changed. The day-to-day workings of government, you really didn't notice that there was any difference, I don't think. And so things move on, and Carlisle continues as one of the nicer places in this area to live. So let's take a look at economic development. Now, this is fun, and you'll probably agree with me. And you might not suggest that this topic falls into the area of economic development, but let's take a minute and talk about the road diet. That's probably still one of the most talked about subjects when you're sitting downtown in Carlisle, perhaps at one of our eating establishments. Maybe you're sitting outside at a table. The road diet always comes up. And it more often than not comes up when you're talking to yourself and you're sitting in a car and you find the related congestion somewhat irritating. Well, I have to admit, I was mayor when that was enacted, but I didn't have an opportunity to cast a vote one way or the other. All votes taken were taken on a motion that was approved, but it was not an ordinance. So the only way I would have been able to take any action whatsoever would have been if it had required a form of ordinance, a legal document, so to speak. But I must admit, we sat and we listened to the engineers, and they conducted road studies, and they had little diagrams and moving animation for us. They told us that these were put together using traffic count numbers from the busiest days of car show travel. So if you looked at what they provided us and using the documents and documentation that they had, I couldn't see why it wouldn't work. And I would have to admit, and I've told people, I probably would have voted for it if I had a vote for it. Unfortunately, in my opinion now, something went wrong. I'm not sure what it was. I don't think that what we see now is what was presented to members of council and the mayor and the public back then. And what we have now is somewhat of congestion. And there's a lot of discussion. We're trying to figure out ways, how can we resolve this? Well, you really can't resolve it unless you go back to the way that was with 2 lanes going in each direction instead of 1 lane in each direction and a center lane. I have to say one thing, though. With 2 lanes in each direction, traffic speeds were a real problem. We had speeds that were tested and checked at 50 to 55 miles per hour, and that's just too fast for a downtown. Obviously, the road diet has reduced that speed. I don't have any facts or statistics, but I would suggest that the number of crashes in the downtown area probably have been resolved as well. So that was one area in economic development that we talked about. Now, also another thing that we would look about would be the roundabouts. Now, that's something new that they're talking about. They want to put those in. I've seen those in other communities. I think we've all probably at least gone through a roundabout once or twice. Carlisle's looking at 3 of them. That should be something interesting that's already brought up public conversation and discussion, but not everybody is in favor of it. Not everybody is opposed to it. But from what I understand, they're going to go through with it. So that's something that you have to look forward to. If you're not happy with it, keep your eyes on the media. Stay tuned here. We'll try to keep you informed. But you better get used. And if you want to practice, you can go to Gettysburg. I think that might be the closest one. Go around the square in Gettysburg, which there is actually a circle. We're going to keep a square in Carlisle, at least as I understand right now. Looking at some of the projects that are truly economic development, over where Carlisle Tire and Rubber, Carlisle Tire and Wheel used to be on North College Street. That property was leveled and construction underway. Portions of that are actually a housing development. People have already moved in. The remaining portion of that is under construction right now. Things are moving well there. One of the other ones would be the old Lear or Maslin Carpet Manufacturing. That facility, empty, vacant at the time, was destroyed by a fire. Now, I think that was obviously much larger than the Carlisle Tire and Wheel footprint, but it got it torn down. They have some work done as far as putting in, I would say, some of the rights of way, putting in curbing and I assume some water and sewer. It's hard to tell. But that one seems to be moving a little slower, although there's been a lot more talk about what's going to go in there. There have been talk about some unique types of apartments, discussion about a hotel or motel going in there. Nothing new that I've heard about that. Talk about restaurant going in there as well, all related mostly to the events of Carlisle events at the Carlisle Fairgrounds. That one a little slower. The third one, just a block to the east, that was the old Tyco facility, much smaller. There's been demolition done, there's fencing up, but still we've seen no construction as far as that goes. I also mentioned in this area the point at Carlisle Plaza. I don't know if you're like me. I remembered speaking with the owners of that when I was mayor. They promised me good things to come. And we met later and they promised me more good things to come. And then I was sold, obviously, to someone else who didn't really have much to say about anything, but nothing has happened there. Well, in fact, its biggest revenue generator, the Bonton, has moved out, and now we have another building, an extra building, sitting vacant there. It's kind of disappointing that piece of property is just sitting there like it is. No idea what, if anything, is planned for it other than to keep it like that. It would be interesting if the property owners, and I think that would be either Ahold or the Giant Food Company, would come forth with something that would say, well, this is what we're going to do here. Give the people of Carlisle an opportunity to chew on it and give them an opportunity, perhaps let them know what you're thinking so they can let you know what they're thinking. It is an important piece of property. Now, there have been some controversies over the years since I've left, and I would suggest that one of those was the creation of a Human Relations Commission. That took up a lot of time at council. They were very thorough in what they did. The topic was very controversial, but council listened. They did not rush into it. They took a great deal of public discussion and public comment, and they came forth and they created the commission, and to the best of my knowledge, it has not been needed yet. That's a good thing. I guess it's there if it's necessary. Sometimes, though, I do ask if perhaps government isn't getting just a little bit too far into our lives. There is a State Human Relations Commission for which complaints could have been forwarded. The council, I think from what I've read and understand, felt that they wanted to be able to handle it at the local level, and for that reason there is in place an ordinance, legislation, a law that would permit it to be handled and would be required to be handled locally because that commission exists. Another one that was very controversial was when the council announced that it wanted to delve into the idea of taking the police dispatch from Carlisle Borough right in the police department and move it to Cumberland County control. That was very controversial because the Carlisle police dispatchers did much more work than or much more in-depth work, I should say, than the Cumberland County police dispatchers do. Cumberland County police dispatchers basically took the person's name, address, telephone number, the nature of the complaint, and passed it on to the police officer. In Carlisle, the dispatcher was very attuned to anything and everything that was going on in the community. Many cases could answer questions themselves, provide the caller with the answer that they needed, didn't even require them to take up the time of a police officer to handle the situation. Even in more in-depth or detailed complaints, the dispatcher was trained and could handle those as well. So many calls were handled immediately with one call into the dispatch, with the dispatcher trained and able to handle those calls. Council decided that they were going to go ahead and move ahead with that. They were planning to be able to save about $300,000 a year by doing that, and basically taking the dispatch totally away. I'm not sure what happened, how it happened, or why it happened, but now there is only one shift that is covered by Cumberland County Dispatch, and that's from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. And the rest of the time, from 7 in the morning until 11 at night, there is a dispatcher at the station. People can still walk into the station to have complaints handled during those hours because there is a dispatcher there. So what initially started out as a savings of about $300,000, from what I understand, has now come down to about a $30,000 a year savings. One of the other issues that came up was the rental inspection that passed, and now it's as we speak, Borough Council was considering some amendments to the rental unit borough ordinance. That's a very controversial issue. Some communities have it, some communities don't. But the idea of setting standards and then having them inspected because you have a property that you're renting to someone, I understand the controversy of it, but it's extremely difficult. And in the minds of many people, if you look at the laws that already exist, it seems that the tenant has more rights in many cases than the property owner. And sometimes I've often said to myself, I'd never want to be a property owner and be renting my properties out, because while the majority of the tenants are good, worthy people, I've seen firsthand that there are those that are not. They don't pay their bills, they destroy property, and anything that relates to the tenant laws does definitely favor the tenant and gives them many an opportunity to stay while the landlord has to look, at what's going on at his property and say what is fair. I've heard no complaints about the current law in the borough as it relates to tenant inspections. Time will tell, and we're open here. We'd be happy to hear what you have to say about it. And finally, the one issue that came and went, and it came and went very quickly, perhaps unfortunately, was the Borough of Carlisle had the opportunity to opt in to having a mini gaming casino here. I was somewhat surprised that there was a public hearing and then another one, and I was surprised at how quickly Borough Council basically threw in a towel and said, "We're not going to opt into this right now." I felt, having attended 2 hearings on it, that many people had the misimpression they were going back to movies from the 50s and 60s where they saw gambling casinos tied in with graft and corruption and prostitution and drug use and drug sales. That's not the case in Pennsylvania, and I can tell you why. The Pennsylvania gaming law is very, very strict. The Gaming Control Board is very quick to levy a fine against any infraction or violation of the law. The owners of these facilities are under constant scrutiny, and so the casinos that have opened, very, very few complaints from people in the area, even from people who go to the casinos, their patrons. I understand they're well run, and I would think that someone would hardly notice a casino there, especially the mini casino. It's not like the ones that you would see at Penn National Hollywood or the other ones that are in Pennsylvania. And so interestingly enough to me, it went down very quickly, and sometimes I think some members of council might tell me that they ended the debate on the issue too quickly. And we can look too at, I thought we'd take a look at how some of the personnel matters that have happened. Borough Manager Matt Canlon left. He had been here for about 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer than that. And as I said, now the Borough Manager, under the home rule, has a lot more responsibility, a greater authority, because suddenly he ends up with a new department under his or her list of responsibilities, and that would be the police department. And along with that, as we talk about personnel, I would commend the Borough Council. They had been down to as low as 27 sworn police officers on the force, where they were permitted to hire up to 33. I understand that if they're not there, they're very close to getting back to that complement of police officers, which is necessary. And when you're down from 33 to 27, that makes everybody's job a little tighter. Also, Mr. Canlon was replaced by Susan Armstrong. Ms. Armstrong has been an employee of the Borough of Carlisle for a number of years and on several different occasions. She did leave Carlisle at one point, and she went to the Greencastle down in Franklin County, where she served as borough manager there, and I think got her wings, so to speak, returned to Carlisle as assistant manager under Mr. Canlon, and then upon his departure, it was very good to see that the council had faith in her, knowing she could do the job, and appointed her into that position. One unfortunate incident, person I had the opportunity to work with, Mr. Mike Kaiser, was the borough's public works director. I thought did a tremendous job. Mr. Canlon apparently felt he did not. Mr. Kaiser was dismissed and was not happy about that. He went to federal court, challenged his dismissal. He won and ended up getting a $650,000 order payment. So he made out well, and unfortunately the borough didn't do quite as well. During my time, we hired Steve Margison as the chief of police. He was there for just a little more than 20 years. He retired. I guess he couldn't stay out of the law enforcement's business, because if you go to Camp Hill, about 15 miles east of here, he is their chief of police down there. And he was replaced by Terrell Landis. He was a chief down in eastern Pennsylvania. I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to be with the new chief, and excellent man with good ideas, and I think you'll see that the Carlisle Police Department will continue its progress as it rolls forward into the years and facing almost new challenges every year, a different type of challenge every year. So that's a rundown briefly on what I've seen happening since I stepped down as mayor. I invite you to, you can send me your ideas, your thoughts, your comments to Kirk R. Wilson at hotmail.com, and be happy to consider your thoughts and looking for ideas for future vlogs. But anyone who knows me I always have something to talk about, and I'm always ready, willing, and able to undertake a challenge. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be back in a week.